best sprinter of 2022. We have some honourable mentions of Tim Merlier, who had a down season, Pedersen, who failed in his main sprint targets at the TDF, but then won a break stage, but that doesn't count for these purposes. He did win sort of reduced sprints in the Vuelta, very versatile. DeLee had a fantastic season as a neo-pro, but didn't win a World Tour race. We got Van Aert, who was consistent, seconds, thirds galore in World Tour sprints, but not sure he won a World Tour sprint this year. Stage 1 in the Dauphiné. What was that? That was kind of an
reduced.
We'll count it. We'll count that one, reduced-ish sprint. So, yeah, it's, again, I think a top two of Philipsen and Jakobsen, Benji, who are hard to pair apart. But this show, as always, is brought to you by Zwift. Whether you're just starting out on your cycling journey or are looking for those final tune-ups ahead of a big event or race, Zwift is the online cycling platform that makes things fun, as well as being the named sponsor of the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift and this podcast. If you want to find out more about Zwift, the platform, the race, go to Zwift.com, and if you want to try it out, you can get a free 7-day trial. Any honourable mentions or third spots that you'd like to dive into a little bit more? Is Wout van Aert being discredited because he missed out on a few photo finishes?
Not necessarily, I'd say. I believe that a lot of Wout van Aert sprinting at the end of Tour de France stages was because he was in the perfect position at the start of a sprint. He does not have that head-to-head acceleration against the Philipsen to beat them when they're both in a competitive position. That's when a Philipsen comes out and is a better one. That's when a Jakobsen is better towards a Wout van Aert. But we also got to mention Caleb Ewan. Like, we've mentioned him last year. In this same awards discussion, he was the fastest sprinter on paper, but couldn't deliver because his team couldn't place him in a competitive spot. This year, I'd argue that, first of all, his team couldn't place him in a competitive spot. He had multiple crashes throughout the Giro, a crash throughout the Tour de France as well. And next to that, he was beaten head-to-head by other sprinters on multiple occasions, like by Jakobsen at both Elfstedenronde and Kuurne, Brussels-Kuurne. So... No, was it Brugge?
Yeah, Kerner. Jakobsen fucking torched him, dude. Ewan was in the wheel too.
Exactly. So he's not necessarily the fastest sprinter on paper either, if you consider that situation occurring multiple times in the season. So I'd argue that Caleb Ewan is the big loser of this award show when it comes to his sprinting, because on paper he was one of the stronger sprinters in the past, if not the strongest at the past, but this year, I have a hard time putting him up there, and especially next to a Philipsen and Jakobsen who have delivered. A Mark Cavendish who hasn't necessarily had the race opportunities at the highest level like UAE Tour and a Tour de France sprint to be able to display that. At the Giro, he had a stage win, but he also didn't deliver in some other stages there necessarily. Milano-Torino, he did end up winning, but that was against not necessarily the best sprinters in the world. I don't know. His best sprint was still that Saudi Tour sprint? Was it Saudi Tour at the start of the year?
It was,
Mark Cavendish?
I think Oman.
Yeah.
I think Oman against Gaviria. I think I want to go into bat for Cav a little bit here. I think Cav, you can't look at the second half of this season, and I guess I'm being generous. And listen, it's the awards show. I'm going to bend the facts to suit the outcome I want and the story and narrative I want. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to do right now. Listen, Cav should have gone to the Tour. We all know that. It's now after the Tour is finished. I mean, how many times in the last year has Jakobsen pretended like his Shimano chains dropped, like in a sprint or missed a corner? Like, it can't be dropping that much, Fabio. You should already be in the big ring. You got dropped by Seneschal in the Vuelta. Cav, again, I would have taken the most ridiculous. I would have taken Cav, But in the Grand Depart, I think I've said this before, he's not allowed to contest the sprint. At 10Ks to go, he has to go back to the vehicle. Jakobsen gets those first two, and then he comes into play in the later Carcassonne stages, which Philipsen won, which Jakobsen couldn't get around the course.
Olaf Kooi, which is a sprinter we haven't spoken about necessarily in the sprinting discussion here, and Dylan Groenewegen. Those are two Dutch sprinters that have been performing quite well this year, but very opposite ends of their career as well. Groenewegen, stage 3 at the Tour de France victory. I think that was the one sprint where he had a rider from Bike Exchange that last minute brought him on the side of the peloton towards the front and then put him in a position where he could at least compete. And Groenewegen had to worm himself towards the actual front. And then Groenewegen was able to sprint for it and still won that sprint. So a very strong sprint there by Dylan Groenewegen. I'd argue that he's still one of the fastest sprinters in the world, with not necessarily the best lead out surrounding him. Had in some occasions a good lead out, I will add that though, but I'd argue not the best in the world when it comes to his lead outs, and not the best sprinter in the world for me either. Olaf Kooi didn't ride the craziest races, but he did ride at high level, like Tirreno, UAE. Those are top sprints. Podium 3 times in those 2 races. Won numerous races throughout the season that were lesser, so 1.pro races or 1.1 races. But that doesn't necessarily say anything outside of the fact that he beat Jasper Philipsen twice in the last 3 months, which in this year where Philipsen is of such a high level is valuable? Or would you say that a Philipsen has been very strong at the best races, but not necessarily consistent at the 1.1 races?
I think maybe a little bit less important for him than the ones that, because last year, right, he didn't win a tour stage, and then he came after the tour. He's like, I better win some races. I could be, who knows? Maybe just got unlucky. But I don't know. Philipsen, serious guy. I think again, third is really hard to. I'll go through my list now. Third, I have Cavendish, third best sprinter in 2022. He won 2 World Tour sprints, pure bunch sprints. One was the Grand Tour stage. He got sold lead-out-wise in the Giro, absolutely sold. If he had Damar's lead-out, he would have won another one. UAE Tour was against serious guys, and his sprint was 300 metres in the wind. Beat Philipsen, beat Damar, ridiculous sprint. And Torino, he won a one-day race as well. And then after the tour, he honoured Britain and then sort of, I think, packed it up. Oh, no, he came second in some Belgian race recently. That's unfair to him. But I'm putting him third just because the other contenders are Damar and Groenewegen, right? And Damar won, how many Giro stages did Damar win?
3.
Fuck, that's 3, yeah. And a plenty stage. That's tough. No, I'm going to go against him just because I got in trouble for saying that he was unfair last year for saying that riders are taking caffeine pills and it's unfair when he had a down year in his book, and then he came back this year and won 3 Grand Tour stages. So I'm going against him. I'm going Cavendish, and then people can say it's British bias because they don't know where I'm from. No, but I do believe Cavendish was at his peak this year better than Damar as a pure bunch sprinter. Groenewegen, just his race calendar was weird. I know he won that Tour de France stage, but that was it. That was his only World Tour win, and then he was really missing in a lot of other sprints, even though I think he was fast. I can't credit you for the Hungary ones. And then I'm going Jakobsen second, Philipsen first. I think Philipsen won more Tour de France sprints than Jakobsen, with probably a worse lead out. He won 2 UAE Tour stages, a couple of .pro stages here and there. For Jakobsen, I know he won more races, 4 more races, but I don't care about Tour de Hungary. Like, 2 stages there, they don't count. And the Valenciana ones were against like Evenepoel, I think came 7th in one of them. Like, I don't care. And I'm going to count the Turkey ones for Philipsen because there were good sprinters there. So, and it suits my narrative. So I'm going Philipsen 1, Jakobsen 2, Cav 3.
Okay, but for your narrative, just to say, is the Turkey sprints also the ones where he got beaten by Caleb Ewan twice, who we didn't put in the top 3, or is that just outside of the narrative so we don't think about it?
Yeah, well, Caden Groves won one of them, and I obviously think he's really good. So Turkey does count for a lot, yes. Australians did well at Turkey. So he had excuses.
Yeah, I'll take that. Anyway, when it comes to my top three, it's actually I'm gonna put Arnaud Demar on the third spot, and the sole reason I do so is because you're lucky. Between France and like Andorra, there's mountains, so you're better protected. But if the French decide to invade Belgium, I'm completely done for. So I have to put Demar on third just to protect my own identity and my own being. So that's why I put Demar in third. And to be honest, because he was also just strong at the
No, he was
Giro
better.
in a.
He was better.
Okay, and next to that, I would argue that a rider that I don't have in my top three but spoke about already, Olaf Koy, only 20 years old. He's destined to win World Tour stages next year. He's destined to win Giro stage if he's sent to it next year. If he had a proper lead out that put him in the right position at UAE Tour, he would have won stages there. At Tirreno, he came really close with a limited lead out as well. He's destined to win multiple World Tour, Grand Tour stages in the next couple of years. And I'm saying that in the next 3 years, we're going to have an award show on this same podcast where Olaf Koy is one of the top two riders in the sprints discussion. That is destined to happen, considering he's only bloody 20 years old. Like, the guy's nearly 5 years younger than me. I'm like feeling old when I think about Olaf Koy, so that's sad. Fabio Jakobsen in second, and the reason I do so is because only winning one Tour de France stage, he should have won more than one Tour de France stage, in my opinion. And I'd argue that is skill that Philipsen has, which I put in the first spot, by the way. Jasper Philipsen as the best sprinter of 2022. The reason I put Philipsen above Jakobsen is, while head-to-head, I'd argue that a Jakobsen could straight up still beat a Philipsen 50% of the time. It's the lead-up towards the sprints and the way that Jakobsen loses wheeling corners and is less... he doesn't want to go for the gaps that a Philipsen goes through. In UAE, we saw Philipsen go through gaps that literally did not exist on my screen, and he appeared on the other side fully alive. So that should not happen. That's magic. And Philipsen is literally doing that in those sprints. And I'd argue he won 2 Tour de France stages, but if Ricard is here at top level, he wins 4 of them. And that would have made this discussion very, very clear. And I'd argue that if Merku was at top level, it wouldn't necessarily have brought Jakobsen to 3 Tour de France stage wins.
How would Merku being there on stage 3 of the Tour? He kind of was there. Jakobsen lost the wheel through the corner and got shuffled back into Narnia. Like, Philipsen had and he didn't have Krieger for a lot of the stages either.
Yeah.
His lead-outs were not great. Like, I think Philipsen, and thus you mentioned Tour de France, sprinting is not just about straight line speed. If there's any technicality, if there's fatigue resistance across the 3 weeks, if there's getting over a 10-kilometer, 5% draggy climb on a miserable stage, Jasper Philipsen is who I want over Jakobsen. And not every sprint is pancake flat, 2 watts per kilo for 2 hours beforehand, like in Hungary, where Jakobsen, does really well. So, yeah, I'm going with Philipsen. I think Philipsen is the correct choice. I think next year, if Ricard comes back, he could do some serious damage. And, he just has that, luckily it hasn't happened too badly yet, but Philipsen takes some big risks, man. He's full threat of death, will do anything, and you kind of do need that for results as a sprinter too.
For certain. And let's talk about the other Alpecin sprinter that goes to Quickstep for a second. Merlier, not in this top 3, not in my top 5, arguably, but I'd still say he's one of the fastest sprinters if he's in a competitive position and so forth, or at least top 5 in top speed. But he's going to Quickstep now. He's going to have a, on paper, better lead out. If they can get their lead out going after Merku might be replaced by a
Casper Pedersen.
Casper Pedersen. I was super confused for a second. I was going to say Andersen, which is Casper Andersen, the guy that goes to UAE. So all these Casper...
Hans Christian Andersen.
Stop it. All those names. I can't handle it anymore. But anyway, if they can get their lead out going, it wouldn't surprise me if next year we have the same discussion and Merlier's in the top 3 because he won so many races just because Quickstep got him on the rails again. Do you think that's impossible?
I doubt it.
Okay.
Gaviria is better than Merlier. Fernando Gaviria, I would have signed.
Not at Movistar.
Yeah, well, but Merlier Movistar, I don't think he'd be too crash shot either. Same bike, I guess. But yeah, Gaviria positioning, climbing, Grand Tours, fatigue resistance. I would have signed him. Probably he wants too much money. But yeah, that's our top three for the sprinters. I think Groenewegen is the one who was really consistently fast enough this year. He beat
Yeah.
Jakobsen in Hungary. He's beaten these guys in a Tour de France stage. It just didn't go right enough, and I can't put that all on the lead out either. So maybe he's the guy who next year, if Bike Exchange get it clicking, their signings don't really suggest that, but they got young guys like O'Brien, who, was a Neo Pro this year doing the lead out. So maybe he takes another step up. That was sprinters.